Ethics in media deal with right and wrong. While ethics are present in every part of mass media, journalism is heavily saturated with questions, and judgments have to be made often on what to release, publish, and where to place it. The basis of ethics is quite simple. We learn in kindergarten that we should treat others the way we want to be treated. We need to have empathy and not exploit others, and remember that we have great power as media people to keep people's dignity intact or to strip that away. And we know what is right and wrong on a human level. And while we know what is right and wrong, things can become gray. People make bad decisions and people get forced into the limelight against their will. There are a lot of theories and prescriptions on how to handle gray areas, but none of them are all right all of the time. And it's ultimately a reflection of us, the media creators, on how we treat the subject we study, the people we exploit, and the questions that we ask. The difficulty in handling ethical questions when dealing with information and people has spawned a need for basic guidelines of ethics. These are known as prescriptive ethics. These guidelines are helpful to start with, but are broad in their scope and do not resolve every dilemma that comes about. The earliest adopted code of ethics in mass media was the 1923 Canons of Journalism put forth by the American Society of Newspaper Editors. These guidelines are respect for privacy. Reporters must show dignity and respect for privacy and well-being of all people at all times. But this guideline can be morally trumped by the public's right to know. Then there's a commitment to timeliness. Reporters should be timely and accurate. And this is difficult because reporters often rush to publish news, and taking time to verify facts can delay the work and make it less timely. So these two things are in conflict, timeliness and accuracy. Being fair. Reporters should do their best to deal fairly with the general public and their clients. This point of ethics can get skewed when a reporter writes a persuasive piece, which is not always dishonest, but fairness will depend on who the message was created by, for, and the motivations behind it. Conflict of duties is another difficult point that plays a role in ethical decisions. Media people can run into issues when dealing with moral issues of their personal lives, the audience, their employers, society at large, and their profession. With the self, reporters can be affected and swayed on a personal level by relationships with the people in the media, and by self-preservation, personal issues, bribes, and their conscience. We all see every issue differently, and the prescriptive we have will affect what we report and how we report it. And a reporter's reputation can make or break their career. So if reporters make a decision based on bad choices or the persuasion of others, it can actually ruin their career or pull them to the top in an immoral way. And sometimes it is imperative that a reporter make a decision on how to report something based on how it will affect their life. So this is a real dilemma for media people. Conflict of duties concerning the audience. The audience has a right to know about the changes and the dangers and news happening around them, but a reporter must decide which details are pertinent to the story and which will only serve to harm the subjects of interest or the audience themselves. So this is why the names of rape victims and AIDS patients are left out of most reports. It serves to protect people while informing the public. So we should not expose people with complete disregard of their feelings and their lives. And as media people, it's very important to weigh the pros and cons of exposing people to an audience and what we owe the audience when we do not give them all of the information. Usually, a journalist also has a duty to their employer, but this should not transcend the duty to the truth. And while it's really difficult to walk a line between a parent company and damaging information about them, reporters should really examine their role in supporting the journalism profession and its single-minded ideology for truth-seeking. The profession the media person is in requires a certain amount of loyalty, but it should not ever trump what is just. In regard to society, the media have a duty to work on behalf of people and inform them. So Aristotle's The Golden Mean is applied as a right action in journalism. It is moral to remain moderate in all things and seek truth. This is where we get things like the equal time rule and our value of objectivity. And it's simple civility that is expected, the do unto others, to treat them with the same dignity that you would expect to be treated with, and not harm those you come in contact with. And this is not always easy. Many times when creating media, we have to step outside of our comfort zones, or media folks have to step outside their comfort zones and ask really difficult questions of people in times of stress. Questions that we ourselves would not like to be asked, but we do so, in order to seek the truth. A good litmus test is to weigh your individual sense of comfort in some situation with the importance of the message being sought, and if they are extremely out of balance, you can be pretty certain that you're not acting in a moral or ethical way in what you're doing. So moral principles are kind of simplistic, but become gray based on your perceptions, and you have to have empathy and seek the truth in a moderate way to not harm everybody that is in your path. So there are other philosophical approaches which are based on beliefs you subscribe to and can help media people in a decision-making process, and these are called categorical imperatives, which is like an overarching principle that can be applied to a variety of moral situations. Categorical imperatives are the approach that you use to decide what is right. For example, John Stuart Mill, a British thinker from the 1800s, proposed the principle of utility. Utilitarianism supports the choice that creates happiness for the greatest number of people. So this spirit is embodied in journalists saying the people's right to know, and the concept is part of the principle behind investigative journalism and reporting on government activities, and just the general idea that one person or a few may have to sacrifice their happiness for the sake of everyone else. Pragmatic ethics is a thought process concerning ethics based on American thinker John Dewey, and he had the assumption that actions should be judged by the results that they produce. So this philosophy works on the idea that media people should consider the consequences before following through on an action. And this doesn't always help in ethical decisions because we don't really have any way of knowing the outcomes of our actions before they happen. In the 20th century, John Rawls introduced this idea of the veil of ignorance. And he proposed that everyone should be treated the same, which is called egalitarianism, and the veil of ignorance is integral in this type of decision-making philosophy because the veil requires a blind eye to outside factors that might affect your decision. And egalitarianism says we should always make the right choice and take the right action no matter what. Robert Hutchins led the intellectual group the Hutchins Commission, which studied mass media in the 1940s, and the commission said that media people must make decisions which serve society, and that is who they are accountable to. And this reasoning is similar to pragmatic and utilitarian thinking, where the reporter must weigh the impact on the public and choose the action which will benefit them the most. But again, these are all difficult to kind of wade through and figure out which is the right action. So all of these philosophical approaches fall in two categories: either a process or an outcome, or a deontological or a teleological ethical perspective. So deontological ethical stance is based on the idea that good actions flow out of good processes and vice versa. Deon means duty, which relates to a rule-based system like the Ten Commandments or prescriptive ethics. The process defines the outcome, and so guidelines are necessary. Teleological, tele, is from the Greek word which means result or consequences, so utilitarian, pragmatic, and social responsibility theory fall under this distinction. And the teleological perspective says that blindly following rules can lead to harm, and so deviations must be considered. It's kind of a proof is in the pudding theory. So if an action is right, the consequences will be positive. Deontologists see two primary flaws with teleological ethics and have labeled them situational ethics. And people who like rules and guidelines would say that the teleological approach to ethics lacks foresight and guiding principles, that they're too loose and they cause flip-flop ethics that change based on external forces and are therefore not a good practice. Egalitarians are of the deontological stance and just believe, you take that right action no matter what, and it's based on certain rules. So those are the differences between those viewpoints. The moral dilemmas and problems facing mass media can be very, very, very complex. An ethicist named Ralph Potter devised a four-quadrant model for sorting through these messy problems, and it's called Potter's box. So the first stop in the box is to discover the facts of the situation. And then the reporter must identify the values that relate to the facts. And some values may contradict other values of the reporter, and these must be sorted through. Like, for instance, to print the name of a rape victim. Let's say you're writing the article and you have permission to use the name. On one hand, it would be of interest to the public to have that information, and then on the other hand, you have a duty to protect the victim, and they are unaware of the consequences of releasing their name could have. So you have to weigh these ethical issues and take the positive action. So then you move on to quadrant 3, and this is principles, where your philosophical stance comes in. If you have the utilitarian stance, you would print the name because only a few people would be harmed, while the public at large would be informed and benefit from that information. If you followed do unto others, you would not print the name because you would not want to suffer those consequences yourself if it were you. So then you move on to the next quadrant, which is loyalties, and this is where you examine what reasons are you printing what you're printing. Are you doing it for the public good, for yourself, for your employer? Who are you concerned with offending or harming? What's your purpose? Are you adhering to a code of ethics? So Potter's box is a logical process that helps media people wade through ethically murky water and define the answer that is right for them based on facts, personal values, philosophical principles, and motivations. Ethics are a very personal matter, and what is right in the mind of one person may not always be legal. Usually the code of ethics is more limiting on a media person than the law, but there are instances when journalists might choose to break a law to serve the public or to get the story. A good example of this is someone speeding to get to the scene of a news break or going to jail to protect a source. Accepted practices are things that media companies do without considering the ethics involved. These are just done, and it may be widely known that they are of morally or ethically wrong actions, but they're looked past because it is the way that things are done. And it's important as a media person to evaluate unexamined practices in your work that seem immoral or incorrect, and not accept them at face value and be critical of your position within the scheme of things. And when you have to be critical of the situation or the scheme of things that your place within journalism or within the media, it's good to apply prudence, which is just basically using your own wisdom and your own moral compass to decide which action is right or wrong, even if it's inconsistent with your principles. Well, there's still some unsettled questions within ethics in the media. So let's look at plagiarism. We all know that plagiarism is a big ethical no-no. It's been really pounded into us for our entire education that we should not steal the work of others and then pass it off as our own. So this point is not really an unsettled question, but there are questions about what is plagiarized and what is borrowed or drawn upon, and a recognition that we as a society need the ideas or the innovations of others to build more and more complex ideas. So questions arise when institutions exchange stories or public relations gets involved in story creation, and we have a need to watch what the competition is writing. So the result of these things can be subliminal memory and innocent recall of facts and sentences that were not intended to be copied. And it's just really difficult to report about the same topic at the same time with the same format in the same media type without drawing on the sources for your information and without sounding familiar to the next guy. And then the misrepresentation of facts is really frowned upon. An example of this was Janet Cook, who worked for the Washington Post, and she wrote a story called Jimmy's World about an 8-year-old heroin addict, for which she won a Pulitzer Prize. And then she had to come forward and say that she lied and that she had they found out that she falsified her resume to get the job and she made the story up. And so she had to confess to this and then return her Pulitzer Prize. So basically she ruined her career by lying. It's very, very frowned upon to misrepresent things. Staging is not as frowned upon as misrepresentation, but it's pretty much the same thing. PR people do this a lot. They'll stage an event to get press coverage. An example of this is a man I know named Ace London, used to work with Jane Mansfield, a famous actress, and they designed a bra that she was walking down the red carpet and she fell out of it on cue to attract pictures and media attention of her. And then of course, like Janet Jackson was accused of a PR stunt when she had her wardrobe malfunction with Justin Timberlake. These staged events and situations are usually pretty photogenic and they generate readers, and they're really easy to cover because the PR people will invite the media there or make sure that the media is there to cover it. So they're generally accepted as a practice within the media, but they are untruthful and they're not news, even though they might get presented in that way. Recreations are like a reenactment on a reality show, like crime scene reenactments on a show. And while reenactments are not always labeled as such, people can generally tell the difference between them and reality TV. Selective editing is another way to skew the media, which falls into that gray area of unsettled ethical questions. And this is when editors make really strong decisions in editing to reach a goal of the story or create a story from footage. So this is a common practice in reality television. The story is there, but things are taken out of context and rearranged or amplified in order to fit a particular storyline. Fictional methods, and this was the case with Jimmy's World. The story was fictional and passed off as news. Morals and ethics can get even further diluted when reporters accept gifts and freebies from companies and people that they are covering, even if the gifts, junkets, trips, and products do not sway the reporter's ability to focus on the truth. It is generally seen as a bad practice to take gifts from the subject of your journalistic stories, even if it's just because it looks bad, and it can, people associate that with leading to corruption. So that's what I have for you about Chapter 17, Ethics, and have a good day. Thanks.